Hey guys, so today we're talking about the evidence synthesis of visual motor handwriting interventions. Our focus is on children with handwriting using three main interventions we found through research. I also want to make a quick note that visual motor skills can include adults as well, so OTs can treat visual motor skills with adults, but we chose to focus on children with handwriting.
So, the first handwriting intervention that we're going to be talking about is a sensory motor approach. And the reason why we wanted to single this one out specifically is because it's one of the most commonly used approaches in OT practice to improve handwriting skills. Actually, in a study that wanted to determine the most common intervention approaches by OTs to improve handwriting, about 90% of OTs surveyed said that they do use a sensory motor approach. So it's super common and it's focused on improving foundational skills. So some of these skills are visual perception, visual motor integration, kinesthesia, in hand manipulation, proprioception, etc. And some possible activities that we could create that would be using a sensory motor approach are playing catch, playing table tennis, heavy work activities, word searches, mazes, stuff like that. And these activities aren't specifically focusing on handwriting itself, but more of the foundational skills that go into handwriting.
So, the handwriting intervention that I will be talking about is the technology based training through the use of computer, tablets, iPads, and other devices. It provides visual, auditory, and immediate feedback and can attract and sustain child attention. It focuses on improving visual perception, fine motor, letter formation, and spatial arrangement, which is essential for handwriting. It's commonly combined in other intervention like the sensory motor, especially in school setting. It's also being used in individual with learning disabilities.
I chose to focus on handwriting programs. So, Handwriting Without Tears was developed to provide a developmental and multi-sensory approach to children that was created by occupational therapists. Roberts et al. Explains a couple of the stages that Handwriting Without Tears implements. So, just imitation, copying, independent writing. They use grouping, so grouping of letters that have similar difficulties or that have vertical or horizontal lines.
So, for the evidence behind the sensory motor approach, the effects of two handwriting intervention programs for students with handwriting difficulties were compared. Students in grades 2 to 4 were randomly assigned to a sensory motor intervention, a task oriented intervention, or a non treatment control group. Both intervention programs also included higher level functions, so like cognitive or executive functions, and handwriting speed and legibility were measured before, immediately after, and 4 months after the intervention. So they found that both the sensory motor and the task oriented groups improved in their overall legibility and letter formation, though it's important to note the task oriented group did improve more, and the task oriented group scored higher than the sensory motor group on spatial organization. So, though sensory motor intervention did show improvement in the children, task oriented was a little bit better. And I thought this was a level 2 quantitative study because the experimental rigor was raised a bit because they were randomized groups. The next article I found, there were 38 children, 6 to 11 years of age, with handwriting dysfunction, and there was no identified educational need. And they were randomly assigned to one of two intervention groups or a control group. This was either a sensory motor group or a therapeutic practice group. And they found that the children receiving therapeutic practice moderately improved, while the children receiving the sensory motor intervention actually declined in handwriting performance. And the authors explain that they really have no idea how this happened. They don't have too much of an explanation. I thought that maybe the sample size was pretty small, so maybe that had something to do with it. However, I did say this was a level 2 quantitative study because the groups were both randomized and there were blind ratings.
So for the evidence-based study about the technology-based training, first article that I found is a quasi-experimental group design level 3 in which it compares the handwriting performance of children with ASD before and after 10-week structured program on the iPad carried out daily for 10 to 12 minutes. The results have shown significant improvement on the clinical level on their handwriting. It also show how iPad or tablet is a motivating tools for practitioner, teachers, and children. Some limitation that the authors include are the convenient sample, which a small sample of children from the same school district, possible previous handwriting intervention, and maybe possible previous exposure to iPad handwriting application. So the second article that I found is a non-randomized trial, level 3. It's about computerized visual perception and visual motor integration training program to enhance Chinese handwriting performance among children with learning difficulties, particularly those with handwriting problems. So there were 26 participants, and the results have shown that their visual perception skills as well as their handwriting time, both on paper time and in air time, in this group were improved when compared to the control group. So on paper time defined as the amount of time during the character writing that the pen is in contact with the paper, while in the air time is the time during writing of the paragraph that the pen is not contact with the writing surfaces. So here are the example of the intervention they use on the second study that I mentioned. As you can see, it looks fun, it looks motivating, especially for the younger kids. But it actually work on their visual motor skills and visual perception, which improve their handwriting performance.
I found 2 articles that support handwriting programs such as Handwriting Without Tears. The first one is a quantitative study level 3. The researchers were testing the effectiveness of Head Start programs, one with regular Head Start interventions, and then one with Head Start interventions adding Handwriting Without Tears. There were 40 participants that were enrolled in Head Start programs, and the groups were assigned based on the classroom they were in. So there was 2 classrooms, and they were considered a control or experimental. Both groups showed improvement. However, the Handwriting Without Tears program with the Head Start showed much more improvement than just Head Start alone. And the second article is a quantitative study level 3. The purpose was to assess just the effectiveness of Handwriting Without Tears. Participants were all in first grade. It was not clear how the groups were chosen based on the control or experimental intervention groups, but they did mention that there were 83 boys and 66 girls, and again, they were all in first grade. The results showed that the students receiving Handwriting Without Tears achieved significantly higher improvements compared to students with teacher-designed instruction. So teacher-designed instruction is just a regular classroom that was not receiving any special interventions, whereas the other side is the Handwriting Without Tears special intervention that was received.
So clinical applications for the sensory motor approach, as you guys saw from my articles, recent evidence is kind of mixed, but this still is a viable treatment approach. We've been using it for a very long time. It's been shown to be effective. However, what I learned from these studies is that we should kind of try to combine this with more higher level functions interventions. So things that are actually focusing on the task of handwriting in addition to the foundational skills that go into it.
So for my part, I think it's important that clinicians or teachers know and understand individuals or groups' needs, so that they can use an appropriate computerized training or also combine it with appropriate conventional training to improve their handwriting. Also, it's important that they use themes that it's motivating for the participants. And lastly, the accessibility for all participants and for parents that wants to help their children even at their home.
Clinical applications. So one of the articles talks about 2 different forms or the best intervention to treat with. And sensory motor was the first one, and handwriting programs such as Handwriting Without Tears was the second one, which I found very interesting to keep in mind when we're treating our future clients. And it was developed by OTs for children, so this is very client-centered. It's occupation-based, OT-based. And the one thing I found very interesting was handwriting is the most common referral for OT for school-aged children. One of the articles mentioned that between 10 and 34% of school-aged children need intervention for handwriting. And so when we think about handwriting, we just think writing letters, recognizing the letters, but think about all the things that have to go into it, such as fine motor skills, gross motor skills. It can affect their reading and typing, but also affects their their self-expression and maybe even their social participation. So when we're treating children or even adults and working on handwriting, we want to make sure we are aware of other things that is affecting not just their writing and academic skills.
And finally, future study ideas for sensory motor approach. I'd like to see some more current studies comparing this approach to other interventions to improve handwriting, because as we saw, the evidence that I found was a little bit mixed. And determining if the addition of sensory motor strategies to another approach increases handwriting performance. I think it'd be pretty interesting to see if the addition of a sensory motor intervention to a different intervention improves the skill.
Future study ideas. I would like to see this more in different population group. I would like to compare it with other interventions available out there. And I know there's a lot of new technologies available right now, so it'll be interesting if they have a new study in the year 2021. And then lastly, it'll be interesting to see using this in a longer study.
And lastly, some future study ideas. I'm really curious about the effectiveness of just OT sessions and then OT incorporating Handwriting Without Tears. And I know occupational therapists developed Handwriting Without Tears, so I'm not sure if they can be separated, but I'm curious to see if that's even something we can consider. And the most research was completed with Handwriting Without Tears, but I'm curious on other programs. I only really looked mostly into Handwriting Without Tears, but I did not see very many other programs out there. So I'm curious to see if there are more in the benefits of them we can also incorporate into our future interventions.
And here are our references.